Hello, and welcome to the Tried It podcast, your proven pathway to a better copywriting business. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Nicole.
And we are here today to discuss the third book of our first season. And that book is called Smart Brevity, which is by Jim Vanderhey, don't know, sorry, Jim, Mike Allen, and Roy Schwartz. Just a reminder that what we're going to do today is we're going to be talking about the book and what we've learned from it. And we strongly encourage you to go out and buy the book yourself, because we're going to be discussing our reflections, our takeaways, our implementation goals. But you might get something else from it. So today we're going to talk about the book, our experiences of reading it, what we've learned from it, and what we are going to take from it that we're going to actively apply to our own copywriting businesses. So Nicole, perhaps you would like to start and tell our listeners, give them a quick intro to the book for somebody who's never heard of Smart Brevity before.
Sure. So Smart Brevity, I feel like the description of the book is actually in the name, Smart Brevity. It's all about communicating as briefly and succinctly as possible. And the reason is because the theory is that that's the best way to get a message across. That's the best way to communicate clearly, so that in this world where we're drowning in words, in messages, in all sorts of other noise, that this is how your message is going to get through. I found it a fascinating book. It was like a guidebook. It's an easy read. And I'm not sure I agree with all of it, but I do think it's a good read.
I'm looking forward to hearing your perspectives, the bits that you agreed with and the bits that you didn't agree with. I agree with you. It is a very easy read. And they definitely practice what they preach, because, for example, each chapter begins with an estimation of exactly how long it'll take you to read, things like that. So it's a core part of their philosophy to be very conscious of time, of how you as the reader are spending your time. And they essentially want to give you sort of maximum bang for buck on the time that you're giving them to learn from them. So a really easy, quick read with some interesting ideas in. So I suppose if we were going to sum up kind of their core philosophy, they would say, as you said, Nicole, that one of the things that they say, to quote them directly, is that we are a prisoner to words. That words, this kind of information, content, screen time really dominates our life, and we're getting less out of it because people aren't communicating effectively. And ironically, people have less free time now than they did. They don't say exactly when, they don't substantiate that with facts, but there is more content out there. So, what are you supposed to do as the reader? How are you supposed to learn everything that you're supposed to know? They point to real world impacts of poor communication, right, that it causes businesses to fail, or, people dive down holes of misinformation. So they believe that their alternative, which is Smart Brevity, is a much better way to get your message across to your readers.
Right. I will say something which is an interesting background detail. If I'm not mistaken, all three authors are actually they're journalists, and they developed this system or this approach or framework as journalists, because they saw kind of like this old idea that in order for a piece of content or for a journalistic piece to be good, it had to have lots of words. And they realized that their pieces weren't doing well, people weren't reading them, and so they developed this system. Now, I actually studied journalism, so when I was reading this, a lot of it made me smile, because a lot of it is actually thinking like a journalist with their own twist. Should I maybe just go into the basic framework of Smart Brevity? So the basic, everything is, again, very simple, very succinct, very easy to use. They talk about, I think it's four aspects. So the first is the tease, which is, if you think of almost a clickbaity, but it's not, like a headline to kind of tease somebody's attention. Then the lead, which in journalism, it's also a term that's used, and that's kind of like to lead the person into the story, to kind of like the one very short sentence, which almost summarizes like, why am I reading this? What is this about? The context, which goes into a little bit more detail, and then the deeper, like they go deeper, like this is where you get to read more. And their theory is that like the go deeper part, people will probably read less of, but all of this is structured again so that the message is conveyed clearly, but also that you respect your reader. They're very big on like understanding who your reader is and respecting your reader, which I really liked.
Yes, so that's the format that they preach using for multiple kinds of communication, but especially emails, newsletters, traditional print media, social media. And they would also say, I think if you wouldn't mind me adding, that they're not that they don't oversimplify things, that they believe that their reader is a smart person who is pressed for time, hence smart brevity. So it's not dumbing things down, it's making things more concise, so that you're really communicating the essence of the message and none of the fluff and the filler. I wanted to ask your opinion, Nicole, with your journalistic background. It struck me as kind of a love-hate relationship with journalism. I think that when they dive into their company history a little bit, you can see that they really straddle the time of, can we say, the end of print media and the beginning of the internet. And it was the internet that gave them access to all of these statistics about how little people actually read, how little people actually absorb. And they use techniques of journalism. They espouse them a lot. But they also kind of say that journalists are the worst at being able to write in a way that grabs people's attention. And I don't know if that struck you as true or not, or if you thought that was biased. I just want to hear what you think, Nicole.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, and it's something I also picked up in the book. I think that you touched on something very important, that this is a lot about the transition from print media to online media. And I think there we saw something interesting happening, and not just in terms of statistics and being able to track. I think also in terms of how we write news. And the best thing that comes to mind, which a lot of people will know, is BuzzFeed. Like BuzzFeed is the perfect example of this, that without actually realizing it, they kind of do follow a kind of smart brevity formula without being smart brevity, in that like they have this clickbait headline. It's like no nonsense. It's very lean. So to go back to, sorry, like very wordy answer. I wrestled with this concept throughout the book, because you're asking me basically about like essentially effective writing. Like what is an effective way to tell a story as a journalist? Like should we, do journalists, and like I fell in love with specifically narrative journalism, which is a very different beast to this kind of journalism. And I have to say that I think that this style of communication and this formula is very effective and very respectful of readers and very efficient at conveying an idea. But I think it loses the story somehow. And I think that like there should still be room for, like, if you look at like Vanity Fair or like Rolling Stone magazine, or like those pieces convey information a different way. Like I don't know if it answers your question.
Yeah, I think I agree with what you were saying, Nicole. One of the authors mentioned towards the beginning of the book, as they were at the beginning of developing and implementing the Smart Brevity format, that one of their wives was kind of railing against it, and saying that, why does everything have to be in the smallest possible format, and isn't there room for kind of beauty in writing and for somebody to take you on a journey somewhere with their words, which kind of goes against the principles of smart brevity. And it was a question that I had at the back of my mind throughout reading the book, that they say that smart brevity works everywhere, and also they're quite strict about sticking to this format so that people know exactly what to expect. And on the one hand, I totally understand where they're coming from with that perspective, but it doesn't necessarily leave room for people to have this kind of space where you can meditate and reflect on things, and you can kind of get a bit more insight into how somebody else is thinking about something on a much deeper level, rather than it just being like here's the headline, here's what you need to know. So I don't really have an answer for that unless it involves having two formats for everything, a Smart Brevity format and a non-Smart Brevity format. And I don't think that the authors would agree with me on that. So interesting point. Perhaps that's something that we can talk about later as we get on to the implementation phase of the discussion.
Yeah.
Perhaps you, Nicole, could talk a little bit more about the ins and outs of the Smart Brevity format for somebody who's not come across it before, like what their advice is on how to construct a good headline and a good lead and so on.
Sure. So I'm going to talk in general, like about things that are related to this, and we'll take it from there. One of the things I want to say, which I think is really important, that I really respect, and I think that even if I don't, or reader or listeners and other writers don't end up following this formula, there are gems that apply to, headlines and leads and everything. And a lot of it is about the one idea. Like they talk a lot about the one idea. What is it you're trying to convey? Keeping the reader in mind. Like there's a lot of emphasis, which takes me back to Anne Hindley and understanding who you're writing to, like empathy. Like a lot of it was very cold to me, but there's that, and yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought up Anne Handley, because I was thinking about their different points of view on empathy for the reader, because if I could put myself in Anne Handley's shoes, I think that she's talking about empathy as a perspective, perhaps, of thinking about how to help your reader to learn something, how to guide them through the text. And I think that for the authors of Smart Brevity, they talk about empathy for the reader as well. But for them, empathy is really more from the perspective of your reader is a smart person who's pushed for time, so help them to learn as much as they can. And they don't necessarily view empathy as perhaps it'll take a bit longer to explain the nuance here. I think that they would say, no, cut it. That's a different story.
Right. But I agree with you. But I think at the heart of both of these approaches is the reader, keeping the reader in mind. And Anne also talks about having a clear sense, do the thinking before the inking, a clear sense of what you want to say, which is also what they talk about. They talk about how you need this one idea, right? You need to make sure that you're communicating this one idea, whatever you want people to take away. I don't know if they talk about it with speeches or presentations, but they talk about how you need to think about what is this one thing you want people to take away from this.
I really like that bit, actually, because they kind of give you the power in that situation, because they say that you, as the writer or as the speaker, in the case of giving a presentation, you have the power to decide what your audience's one takeaway is, so you can define it for them rather than writing a load of stuff down and then your audience deciding what they've taken from it.
Right.
Yeah, I thought that was a really good lesson.
Yeah. Like that's the thing. I must be honest, I struggle with very rigid formulas and frameworks. And if you've seen any of my writing, on LinkedIn, especially lately, it's more me, and it's very, very self-indulgent. I'm aware of it. It's me putting myself on the stage as opposed to the reader, and which is why a lot of this book spoke to me, because it goes completely against what I do and how I approach things. My approach is very much about the beauty of language and about taking a story and telling a story. That's what I love. And I don't have an answer, but a lot of the stuff in this book made me think, and I think that it definitely has a place. I think emails, and I think they talk about company meetings, and they talk about presentations, and I don't agree with their chapter on social media at all. I think they missed the point completely.
What part of it did you not agree with?
They made one good point, which I agreed with. They said that the aim of social media isn't necessarily to sell. It's to convey that one point again, to get that one lesson, that one point across. But I think it's so much more complicated than a formula. Like, even though I see a lot of formulaic posts blowing up on social media, I think that, like, I don't know, I think that there is more creativity. Like, I see some of the posts that blow up and it's about creativity. It's about, like, something else. There's some other, I don't know, maybe you disagree with me. I'd love to hear your perspective.
I think, just to respond to another point that you made, from their perspective, I think that they say that Smart Brevity as a format, that they call it, that it's guardrails, but it's not too prescriptive.
Right.
That's in their own words. Guardrails,
Right.
not rules. Whether I think that they totally agree with that, no, I think it comes across as a bit more rules than guardrails, but they say that it's not very prescriptive. Yeah, I think that there are pieces of content that work that aren't at all in Smart Brevity, and I don't know how they would explain that. I mean, I think that pieces of content that work would probably be ones that have a perspective or nuance. So from that point of view, they're defining the one takeaway, but perhaps they explain it in a different way that's not Smart Brevity. I think, yeah, perhaps social media, that's where I could tell that they were really coming from the point of view of the sort of journalism background, where how do you share news on social media in such a way that catches attention?
Right.
So that's them, whereas other people, individuals, go to social media to share news with people that's not necessarily news. It's things about their life. They do it to connect with other people, which is a very different perspective.
But their theory is beyond the news. Their theory is that this is how you communicate an idea clearly. Like, that's from what that's what I took away. Like, this is the formula for, like, communicating an idea properly, and, like, even in terms of how the brain works and in terms of how we absorb information and how distracted we are. I don't know. Like,
I think that
yeah,
it's clearly it's not a formula that would work for everything. I couldn't imagine, for example, writing wedding vows in the Smart Brevity format. That's an occasion where you really want to go a little deeper, rather than, here's the headline, I do want to commit to you, Even then they would say that that's a terrible headline, and that you could tighten it up. But I think that they make the point that they use the phrase that people are in a state of continuous partial attention. Right. So they say let people pay less attention. It's not that we pay less attention. It's that our attention is being pulled in more directions than it used to be. So our attention span isn't necessarily shorter. It's just that you could be reading an email on your computer screen, and at the same time, your phone's going, the doorbell's ringing. So even when you're paying attention, you're not fully paying attention. So they want to help you to combat that, so that you can overcome the continuous partial attention of your readers. One thing that they said in the book that I really liked and really made me think a lot was the sentence, brevity is confidence, length is fear. And that's not something that I necessarily follow when I speak, because I know that I'm a little bit rambly. But I thought that was an interesting perspective of essentially, if you said something, you don't need to keep saying it or finding a different way to rephrase it. You could have confidence in the things that you've said. And for them, that confidence comes in, if you're using the Smart Brevity format, your audience is more likely to hear and absorb that message. And they almost paint it as a bit of a virtuous circle, that you gain confidence from that. And then the more you're heard, the more confident you get. And therefore, you don't need to write lengthy texts when you can write short texts, still get your message across and still be heard. I think that was, I mean, that's basically their manifesto, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. And I think
Mm.
it also took me on a different direction. Like it took me to, I don't know, like school, university, and like how this idea that, you hand in this like crazy, like, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 page paper and you're like, wow, it's so like intelligent. It's so, and like, it's the opposite, right? It's not, it's easier. Like it's easier to actually be wordy than it is to be succinct and to nail the message and to be very, succinct, I guess. Like it's a much,
well, isn't
yeah,
yeah, that's the sort of classic Mark Twain quote, isn't
right.
it? That I wrote
Exactly.
you a long letter because I didn't have time to write a short one.
Correct. It's brilliant. It's so true. And that's why, like, I really think that this book, even though like in the beginning I sounded negative about it, like I think there are amazing gems, and like there was a lot that I thought about, and like as I did actually even implement some of it like with a client. I'm
interested about that.
So it was, I don't know if you know what an RFI is.
I don't.
So it's a request for information. And like in the energy storage space, sometimes and like where there's stuff to do with manufacturing and like that kind of thing, sometimes companies will issue a RFI where they ask like contractors to submit information to like apply to be accepted for a tender to win the project almost. And so like I had to write the email for this.
Just to remind our readers, this is your work as a clean tech copywriter, right?
Yes. Sorry. That's the important background. And so I'm writing this email. There's like lots of information I have to communicate. And so what I ended up doing was I didn't follow it to a T, but like I did purposefully structure the information in such a way. And I also used, I think they call them axioms. I used like these like little headings to kind of structure and chunk the content to make it easier for the reader. And the funny thing is my client really liked it. Like they noticed the shift in my writing and they really, really liked it. I don't think they got more clicks or more opens because it was an email. But I do think it was an interesting change, and I think it was a much more effective way to convey very complicated information, because there's a lot of stuff that you needed to know, like as a contractor. So like I think it did a very good job of conveying that information.
Oh, well, that's really interesting to hear. Yes, they're big on using subheadings where possible, especially in emails. And they even say that you could, especially if it's sort of a regular email newsletter, that you use the same headline each time so that people know what to expect in the layout of the email. So it's really interesting to hear a sort of real world perspective on using that.
I think, like, again, to any copywriters or writers out there, like, I really recommend this book. Recommend you purchase it and read it. I think that there are some really good things to take away, and really, like, it. Every time I read one of these books, it makes me reflect on two fundamental things, which I think for me, that's what I took away from this book, is like who I'm writing to, and like what do I want them to take away? Like what is the one message? And again, like I mentioned it earlier, but I'll say it again. Like I've been really hitting LinkedIn hard lately. Like I don't know why, but like this is my thing lately. I'm like, I want my posts to blow up. I don't know why they're not blowing up. I'm throwing everything I can at LinkedIn, which is driving me mad. But anyway, and like I'm trying all these different things to like refine my posts, and like I definitely think maybe I'm jumping ahead, so maybe stop me. Should I go into implementation now? No, like my implementation. Or do you want to discuss?
I think we've got a few more points to discuss before we get on to implementation.
Yeah.
You could give a little tease, a muscular tease, as they say in Smart Brevity.
Yes. What I'd love to hear from you though, Sarah. Like, what was something that really spoke to you about the book?
Well, I know that on this podcast, we're not necessarily doing a compare and contrast between the books that we've read. Just to recap for listeners, if you're joining us at this point, we've read Everybody Writes by Anne Handley, and we've read Building a Brand Story Brand. I always get that the wrong way around.
Me too.
By Donald Miller. And it gave me a different perspective on those books there. I think Everybody Writes is the sort of manual for writing in everyday life. And in Smart Brevity, there's a section, as in Anne Handley's book, where it is basically the rules of how this works. And they lay out the formula for you including some quite practical pointers, such as using words that you can see, as in the most powerful form of, no, it's not the most powerful form of the word. It's just, if there's a word that conjures a visual in your mind, that's going to be a better word than an obscure word. And they argue, I don't know if it's always the case, that word, the more powerful word will also be the shorter word. So I found it interesting that they obsess over headlines, not just for word count, but even syllables within words. And, they'll say, could we substitute that 3-syllable word for a 2 or 1-syllable word that's a bit more punchy. So, in that sense, they are more rules than guardrails. And it's similar to Anne Handley's sort of practical writing tips, but totally different to Donald Miller's quite complicated story brand, which involves many, many elements. I don't think that there's a world where you could do a story brand in Smart Brevity format.
No, I think you actually could. Do you know that? Because
it could be an interesting challenge.
Yeah, no, thank you. Maybe one of our listeners.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, like I wanted to build on what you said. There's a part of the book where they talk about a story, like one of them takes a writing course, and the writing teacher reads a story about a fish, and it's like this evocative story that like brings the fish to life. And she says afterwards, like, what is it that made the story so evocative? And in the end, it turns out that every single word was a single syllable word, which is interesting, And like I think that in my mind, like some of the rules are like basic good writing rules. No, like go for the shortest word, keep it simple. Like that's what we do intuitively, as writers.
Yes, they also had some sort of classic writing aphorisms in there, like tell me a story, don't show me a story.
Right.
And also keep things in present tense if possible, which again, one of Anne Handley's rules. I think that they had some other just interesting general tips in there. Like I like the reframe of thinking of your headline as not just a headline conveying information, but from your reader's perspective. It's the decision point where they'll look at the headline and then essentially think, is this worth me reading or not? Which again, that's a very journalistic way of thinking, but I thought that was quite a nice reframe, because that's something that I had been doing subconsciously as a reader, somebody who consumes quite a lot of news. But I don't click on every single news story I read. I click on the ones that interest me.
Right. And it applies, again, I hate to bring this example, but it applies to social media. Everyone's always talking about the hook. The hook is the headline. That's that piece of like, should I read this? So it's the same.
Yeah. Yes. And the other point that I wanted to bring up before we move on to implementation points is that we touched on it slightly, that they lay out this formula for Smart Brevity, including their rules. But the last section of the book, they also say exactly where this formula applies, and it'll be no surprise that it applies to emails and those kinds of work communications. But they also apply it to meetings, speeches, social media, as we've touched on, visuals. And then they also say, one of their second to last chapter, that they run their company on Smart Brevity. So it really is for them a full all-encompassing philosophy, not just a snappy way of writing an email.
Yeah, even though in preparation for this episode, I looked up one of the writers of this book on LinkedIn, just to kind of see, because as I said, I'm on a bit of a LinkedIn kick, and his posts don't follow this formula. Like he's not terribly active, He has a lot of followers, like not millions, but he has like over 2,000 followers, which is decent-ish. And when he does share something, often it does well, but I think it's because of his community and the fact that he's well known and he's a name, and it's not because of the formula. So like that I was like,
research.
Oh. Yeah, I was very curious.
That's your journalistic side coming out.
My stalker, my inner stalker.
Yeah.
I also wanted to share that, like, again, in preparation, I look, they talk about the Smart Brevity or Axios HQ, which is like this, it's actually a paid offering for businesses. Then I tried to look at and try to see how much it costs, but there's just a demo you have to like apply for, so I left that. But it's basically like to help you with newsletters and for, I think, internal writing. And there was a free tool that I found, and I put in one of my LinkedIn posts, and it rewrote it for me using like the Smart Brevity formula. And I wanted to cry. I really wanted to cry. Maybe we'll include an image of this in the show notes, just because, again, like I think maybe I'm in the wrong block. Like maybe I'm not meant to be a communicator. Maybe like my heart is like, somehow I see myself as like a novelist, which is very sad. But it just took out all of me. Like it took out, I guess, my self-indulgence. It took out like my pretty imagery. I had a thing about a dodo in a museum. Like I had all this creative stuff. It just took it all out. It made headlines. It structured it. It gave it like a headline. I don't know. It was very formulaic, very practical. It got some information across. Very scary. Very not Nicole. So I don't know. I'm on the fence, and I like lately I feel like more and more people are taking up my way of being in the world. Like there's AI, there's this, I don't know. And I want to say that I feel there's still room for creative expression, which I know we touched on, and I don't want to take us back there, but like,
I think that they, I'm sort of playing the devil's advocate here. They do leave space for personality, which they refer to as humanity, I think.
Right.
Certainly writing like a human. And in their newsletter format, I think that they do include a little space very much at the end, at the bottom, for sharing sort of other updates. But I think that they definitely sweep most of the vast majority of that from their writing in favor of communicating the message.
Yeah. That's the thing. Like, there's a section where they talk about like, if you read it, like once you've followed their rules and once you've like almost like shred your writing of all the stuff that I add, all the excess stuff. If it reads too like harsh or it's too abrupt, then they say to add things back. And it's what you touched on, right? The humanity, the human element.
Yes.
But for me, it doesn't go far enough. And I think maybe it's because I'm a different kind of writer. And I will say again that I think that the value of this tool is that it's a very powerful tool for communicating, maybe business communication, but like communicating one idea very powerfully. Like I agree with that. Like I think it also gets you to organize your ideas, which I think is also half the battle. And they talk about that as well.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. Really, ranking them in order of importance. What absolutely must be conveyed, what's less important. Yeah.
Which is also journalism 101.
They offer at the end of the book a cheat sheet, which is the last chapter, which it kind of made me laugh when I read it, because they essentially did the Smart Brevity version of Smart Brevity. But they I think that at that point they list their values, and the values they communicated throughout the rest of the book. But I found it interesting to see those values laid out in black and white. And I think I thought, oh, maybe I would have liked to have seen the values at the beginning rather than at the end. Because I thought that I would have assumed that their top value would be, brevity, clarity, something like that. But they put authority right at the top, which I hadn't seen so much in the rest of the book. It's more of an undertone, but I think it goes back to the, brevity is confidence, and that you need to empower yourself to be the one who delivers the message and have the confidence to do that in this very digestible format rather than beating about the bush. So perhaps I know that it's not something that you agree with necessarily in terms of writing, Nicole, but perhaps you could draw more on the authority element of it and kind of leave some of the rest to the side.
You mean like as a tool to build one's authority?
I think that for them, it's that you already have the power within you, not to be too much of a Disney film. It was within you all along, the authority. And maybe do you feel that when you write from your more personality driven space, do you already feel authority in that? Or do you see it as an authority building exercise?
No, I see it as kind of like self-flagellation, to be honest. But I'm a different, I'm on a different journey with my writing. So I'll skip this question, but I think it's a valuable tool. And before I pass the question back to you, I want to share something else. So I shared with you, Sarah, before the call that I'm trying to, in addition to our book club, I'm trying to just read just for myself, just some fiction on the side. And I started reading a book called Oh, William by Elizabeth Strout. And I'm not going to go into it because that's not the point of this book. But one thing I wanted to share, whilst reading it, I looked for a podcast episode where she talked about the book and she talked about how she writes. And she shared how she's not driven by ideas. She doesn't start with one idea, which I was like, what? She's like, I'm driven by character. Like the character comes to me and the character leads me. And again, like this is a different kind of writing. Like it's a novel and she writes fiction and like this is maybe more where I feel comfortable. But for me, it was such a fascinating take because it's like it completely flips this on its head. Like she communicates ideas beautifully. Like you can't say she doesn't. She creates intimacy on the page. She brings characters to life. But she just goes with it. Like it starts with character, not with idea. She doesn't think before she writes. And I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with this. I just think like it was a fascinating contrast. It shows me that there are obviously different approaches. Yeah. So that was something that came to me.
Yes. Yeah. I think that perhaps, again, putting myself in the place of the authors of Smart Brevity, they wouldn't argue against that because each thing has its own place. It's
Right.
To what degree do you allow that in writing that's not fiction, in writing about other things. There are email lists that I subscribe to where I get longer, more meditative emails from the writer, and I actually it depends on who's written it, but I generally appreciate it.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't read every single email that they sent because sometimes it just arrives in my inbox at the wrong time. But there are times where I appreciate it, and it's for me a sort of permission to take a break from my world, my work, whatever I'm thinking about, and to step into somebody else's place. So I just think that not every piece of communication has to be purpose driven, but I think if there is a purpose that you need to get across, Smart Brevity is not a bad way to do it.
I agree. That's very well put. I have a quick question for you though, if I may, before we move on to implementation. Have you read, so like there, as we mentioned, like the Smart Brevity writers are the founders of a publication called Axios. Have you read any of their articles?
No, I had never heard of it before reading Smart Brevity.
So I'm curious, like this will be my little, if you don't mind, my little task for you for our next, because I want to hear like what you think. I want you to go away and I want you to read some of their articles because I knew of the publication and I'd read some of the pieces before, and I'll be honest, like I don't particularly like the style of writing. I'll be honest, and like maybe that's why I'm resistant to this. But like I'm curious to see like how you feel. Like I'd love you to go and like spend some time, and if you have some time, like just before, on our next episode, and tell me what you think. Okay. And for your readers as well, I'd love to hear from our readers as well. Like maybe you love it. I actually years and years ago, I wrote blog posts for a company in the like self-driving car space. Very strange. And the VP of marketing, he was in love with this formula. Like I didn't actually know it then. I didn't know Smart Brevity, but he sent me to Axios and he's like, I want you to do it like this, where we have like, this is what you need to know, that like this kind of way of writing, which was very hard for me, but I did it. So it's like, let's get down to business. This is what you need to know. Like, I'm sorry if I'm overly negative. Like, I do again think you should buy the book. I do think you should read the book. Like, I do think there's value in the book, and I do think that it made me think. So I appreciate this book, really.
Yeah. Okay, sorry. I've got one last question for you, and then we'll get to implementation points. With you having said that, who specifically would you recommend the book for then?
Interesting. I think I would recommend it to copywriters. I think it's a good thought exercise. But I think business owners, like I think business owners and managers, like anybody in the business world, like I think it's good for. Because like they talk about, like how to communicate, how to run emails, how to run meetings. What about you, Sarah?
I agree with you. And in some ways, they're slightly doing a Donald Miller because the book is a bit of a push for the product, not to the same extent that Donald Miller's is with his old story, brand story. But
right.
Yeah, I would say exactly the same. And it made me think that my background a few years ago was working for a large company that had, I think by the time I left, it was about 15 or 16,000 employees across the world. And I could see how communicating information in this kind of way could be really useful, especially if you're at a team that's kind of at the intersection of several different teams. For example, you might want to get a newsletter from your HR people, but also a newsletter from your regional director and then from their manager. Right. And then you also work really closely with the sales team. So you'd want to know what the sales team is doing. And I could see it being really handy like that. But at the same time, if I was the CEO of that company, I wouldn't say to everybody, okay, you're 16,000 employees, so I want 16,000 Smart Brevity style newsletters. I think that you'd still have to put a cap on it in some way. But if you're, say, the vice president of marketing for a company of 16,000 people and you're trying to pull the reins in on a couple of different teams, a couple of different projects across different regions, by all means, I think that you would find Smart Brevity a useful book to read and perhaps try and apply.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I think it's like anybody who's trying to get an idea across in a business setting.
Yes. Yeah. That was a much more Smart Brevity way of saying what I said. So with all of those things said in a not Smart Brevity way, let's move on to our implementation points. So for listeners who don't know what that is, on the Tried It podcast, Nicole and I read books, but we also, as we're reading and taking notes, decide 3 things that struck us as interesting or effective that we want to apply to our own work or to our client work. So we're going to make those commitments now in front of you. Go away and work on them. And in the next episode, we're going to be reporting back. So, Nicole, I'd like to hear your 3 implementation points, please.
Sure. So, as I mentioned earlier, I'm a copywriter in the clean tech space. Mm-hmm. And I one of my commitments, I want to take one of the projects that I have to do for them this coming week and write it in the Smart Brevity format. Like I mentioned earlier, I've done it, but I want to do it like I did it once and left it. I want to do it like for like a LinkedIn post and see how the client responds.
Interesting.
So that's the first thing, and I'll report back because I have a very specific style for them, and like I've been with them for 3 years. Like over the years, like we've kind of developed our own style of writing. So I want to see how they respond to that. The other one is I have some copy projects which are secret. Sarah knows them, but I can't share them with you at the moment. Due for
good copy projects,
but for our podcast. So I need to work on those. So I thought of maybe applying some of this thinking to those projects and seeing how they go. But we'll see. Like I don't know. I doubt I'm going to implement. You know what I'm talking about, right, Sarah?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I want to see how that goes. And then my other implementation is I actually want to try. Like, this is very hard for me to say, but I'll say it, to do one of my LinkedIn posts in this format.
Interesting.
Yeah, like, again, I've plugged my LinkedIn a lot more because I'm trying to get followers, which is because it's a source of angst for me at the moment. And I want to apply this and see like if it makes the process easier for me and if I'm able to get an idea across better. I think what excites me about it is the first of all sitting down and like defining the idea. Like, what am I trying to say, and how am I going to say it in the way that gets to my reader in the most respectful and the most clear way. So those are my 3 implementation tasks. What about you, Sarah?
Interesting. I'm really glad to hear those from you. My 3 implementation points, I've turned this over in my mind quite a lot because I don't want to get to this point in the podcast and be like, oh, Smart Brevity doesn't work. But no, I think that when you run a 1-person company,
Right.
it's quite difficult because certainly in terms of running the business, I'm mostly communicating with myself. But I want to, since they really push newsletters quite a lot as a good vehicle for Smart Brevity, I want to write an email to my own list using Smart Brevity format. My emails that I send to my list, I'll drop the link for that below, by the way, in the show notes, are quite informative, but I don't always lead with, the one thing. So I want to pick a newsletter which will probably be based on news in the podcasting industry, because that's the space that I work in as a copywriter, and send a sort of almost kind of a breaking news update. So I will go with it and see how it works, see what kind of response I get from it, see if it's easier to write.
Amazing.
So that's number 1, the newsletter to my personal list. Number 2, I thought like you, perhaps I could write a Smart Brevity style blog post plus an accompanying social media post, which again, I think I'm going to make about something that's slightly more newsworthy, because the Smart Brevity format, as we've discussed, really lends itself to sharing useful information that people need to know. So those are the first 2. And then the third one that I'm still mulling over now is, I wonder what it would be like to run my business as a Smart Brevity style business for, say, a week.
This is fascinating. Tell me more. Sarah.
Well, they have one of the chapters in their book about running a Smart Brevity style company. So they give some pointers in that.
Wow.
One thing that they talk about as being a key value of theirs is transparency. So they give the example that they answer almost any question from any employee in quite public ways, for example, in meetings. They give 2 exceptions. They give salary
why they left,
exception, and why somebody's decided to leave the company, because they say that those things are too personal. The salary one, I had some questions about that.
Yeah, Buffer was great. Buffer is completely transparent. You can see, go to the Buffer website, it's like, but anyway.
Yeah. So they're big on transparency, but I was thinking if I did this as an implementation point, I would try and have that transparency in the way that I communicate with my clients, the way that I write and edit my own work, with always this mindset of being transparent, defining the takeaway, defining what people need to know. So putting the recipient kind of first in mind rather than myself. What do you think about that as a goal, Nicole?
I think it's fascinating. Like, I'm very, very curious. I think you should go like the extra mile if you're very bold. I think you should make a post on LinkedIn and say, I've just read Smart Brevity. I'm doing an experiment where for a week I'm running my business as a Smart Brevity driven business. And I'm going to be sharing, like, I think you should be completely transparent.
Oh, that's true. Publicly, transparently.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. I will do that. I don't really. I think it'll be interesting to see how it works, because, I mean, again, my business is me.
Right.
And my clients, I communicate with them, but they don't really communicate with each other. Why would they? So I don't know if it'll really go anywhere.
But there are lots of ways. There are lots of ways you can do this. Like, for example, like you could change small things, right? You could change like how you communicate with them in email. So, for example, you could decide in every email you send them, you're going to adopt like a Smart Brevity format where you have like, this is what you need to know. This is you know what I mean? Like, you could implement in a Smart Brevity email format. You could implement like a lot of things you could do.
It made me think that it could also affect the podcast as well, because, when you and I have meetings, we like to chat, and I love chatting with you. That's one of the reasons why we've started the podcast together.
Right.
But they're very, very anti-chat in meetings, at least. They say that the chatting is before the meeting starts, and as soon as the meeting starts, you are on. You're communicating what needs to be shared, which I believe they said no more than 5 points or something like that. And you're essentially trying to do it as efficiently as possible. There's part of me that thinks, but I like chatting, and when you're self-employed, you don't get to see so many people, so it's equal to chat with the ones that you see. But we will see, Nicole.
No, this is fascinating. I think this is the best experiment we've had through since the beginning of the podcast. Like, you're trying to change something fundamental about your business.
Be prepared to get some real curt messages from me.
You always put one in PS. Sorry if this email seems curt. I'm testing something.
Yeah.
But I really want to know. Like, I want to know. Like, I'm curious to know, like, what aspects of your business you changed and how people responded and how you felt. Like, I would love to. This is very interesting. I must be honest.
Okay. Well, we will see. I think it's it's going to be a whole mindset to get into.
So let's just recap quickly our implementation points. I'm going to go on mine and then you do yours. So mine are, the first one is, I'm going to try and implement this for a client and see how the client responds and report back. Second one, I have some copy projects for the Tried It podcast. I'm going to implement that with that and see how that goes. And the third one is I'm going to boldly apply it to one or two of my LinkedIn posts and see how that goes.
Great. Good recap. Mine is sending out an email to my personal email list, not the podcast email list, using the Smart Brevity format. A blog post plus an accompanying social media post in the Smart Brevity format. And then the third one, running my company as a Smart Brevity style company for a week. Total immersion.
It's amazing. I love it. I love it.
Okay. Right. So
but before we go, we need to plug the newsletter, our membership.
Yes. Would you like to explain the membership for our listeners, Nicole?
I would. So we have what we call the Tried It membership. Mm-hmm. It's like, we call it like your shot of vitamin C, and it's basically your proven path to becoming a better copywriter in 13 minutes a week. What you get is this weekly newsletter where we include tips and very practical, actionable things you can implement like on the spot to become a better copywriter. The idea is that, we're overwhelmed with courses and things, and we want to give you actionable things you can do, small actions you can take to actually move the needle and see a change in your business. In addition, we include things we're working on, inspiration, and some hacks on how to actually grow your business. In addition, there are other aspects to this membership. For example, like you get copy reviews from us and support from us and things like that. Anything else I missed, Sarah?
And members can also vote on which books we're going to read next on the Tried It podcast as well.
Right.
Yeah. Essentially, you're getting a stake in the podcast. The link to join the membership is in the show notes. So you'll get that weekly email from us. And if you have questions about one of our exercises from the newsletter, ping us an email. One of us will answer you. I would say that, the other thing is the newsletter and membership runs all year round, whereas we're running this podcast in seasons so that we have more time to read the books. I would say that you would really benefit from this membership if you're a new or a more experienced copywriter. If you are actively trying to work on your skills, just like Nicole and I are, if you are trying to make space in your calendar to work on becoming a better copywriter, this membership is a really good way to do it, because we're going to be sending these exercises straight to you. You can do it on the Tuesday when the newsletter comes out. You can do it at another time, but it's a really good way of kind of solidifying your commitment to becoming a better copywriter for yourself, for your clients, and for your own business.
And I just want to add, like, I think the appeal for me of this newsletter is that it's not overwhelming. You know, it's not like a big ask. It's 13 minutes a week. And in that time, like, you're going to be practicing your skills, sharpening your skills. And as Sarah said, becoming a better copywriter. So it's not this like heavy lift. It's not this big course that you have to like set aside hours to do. Like, of course, if you fall down a rabbit hole and you love the exercises and you want to go deeper, you can. But it's not. So, and we talked about potentially experimenting with the Smart Brevity format for our newsletter, but we will keep you posted.
Yes. Yeah, I think that we're going to have influences from all the books that we read in the newsletter. So if you spot them, then please reach out and tell us, because we love it when you notice that.
Like a Where's Wally?
Exactly. It's, I love that. Where's Wally for copy? That's such an amazing idea. Or where's Waldo, if we've got American listeners.
Right.
So we'll put the link to join the membership in the show notes. We would really, really love to see you over there. And I think all that's left to say is we'd love for you to subscribe to the podcast, because that way you're going to get the episodes sent straight to whichever podcast listening app you like. And you'll be able to follow us on our journeys in our next episode, where we're going to be talking about how our implementation went, working on Smart Brevity.
Right.
So thank you very much for listening. Take care, and
we'll catch you in the next episode.
See you over there. Catch you on the next time. Okay, thanks very much. Bye.
Bye.